Hello everyone, Japheth here. Today I'm going to be walking you through installing FutureMUD on a Windows server. I already have a video on installing it on the Linux servers and nothing has changed on that. I always meant to make one to install it on Windows, but I figured the majority of people would probably be installing it on Linux for cost reasons anyway. But Delarak ended up making a great video on how to install FutureMUD on Windows to plug the gap, but I actually felt that there was an easier way to do it than the way that he did it in that video, so I thought I'd run you through my version of how to do that. Anyway, Delarak's a great guy, you should check out his channel, and thanks to Delarak for his coverage for FutureMUD in general and this video in particular. So basically I'm just going to be launching a stock standard Windows server on Amazon Web Services. I'm not going to spend too much time walking through all of this stuff because it's quite simple. You may also be doing this on your personal development machine at home if you're just playing around with it and you have a Windows server. The process is exactly the same. But basically, I've just chosen the standard Microsoft Windows Server 2019 on Amazon Web Services, T2 Micro, so the small free tier one. I've had to specify a key pair, and that's the only thing that I have touched other than the default settings. Everything else is the same. So I'm just going to launch that now. Alright, so that's launched. You can tell I've had a couple of goes at practicing. Now this is going to take a few minutes to initialize, so I'm going to pause the video until it is ready to go. Okay, I've given it about 5 minutes, so we're back. For whatever reason, Amazon advises you to let it run for 5 minutes after you start it before you grab the admin password. Probably makes sense, it's busy setting stuff up for the first time, but anyway, if you're in Amazon Web Services you can right click on the instance and get Windows password. I've got my private key here and that's my password for the instance. So now I right click on again and then connect. I want a remote desktop client and it will download the file. I open it up. Yes, I want to connect. There's my password. I will trust this computer. Now this may take a few moments the first time, but basically we're going to be doing 4 things. These are the 4 things that you need to do in order to set up FutureMUD on any Windows server. So the first thing that you need to do is install .NET 6. Your computer, if you're running this on a personal computer, you may already have .NET 6 depending on what else you're running on your computer. But I'm just going to assume you don't have it and walk you through installing that. We also need to install MySQL, which is the database that the engine uses. The third thing we need to do is run the database seeder, which will set up your engine and give you some pre-configured data for your game. And the fourth and final thing that you need to do is open a port on Windows Firewall for external users to connect to. And honestly, that is everything. So, first things first, we are going to go install .NET 6. Now this is an annoying step on the Amazon. Just stop telling me about stuff. There we go. All right, now technically to run FutureMUD, you only need the .NET runtime. That's the only one you actually need. But you probably should install the .NET desktop runtime because some of the tools that come with FutureMUD or may in the future come with FutureMUD may use the desktop runtime. If you were running a website or something, or if you wanted to run the Terrain Seeder API, you would want to install the ASP.NET Core runtime. But we're just going to install this one today. You're most likely going to want the x64 version. Save. Open the folder. It does need to be .NET 6, by the way. .NET 5 or previous versions are not supported. You need .NET 6. Doesn't even ask you for any configuration options or anything, just an install button and it runs. Couldn't really be simpler, in my opinion. That's all done. So .NET 6 is installed now. The next thing that we're going to need to do is install MySQL. So you go to dev.mysql.com/downloads, grab the MySQL installer for Windows. You're not really going to have too many options here, and the default installer is going to install version 8, which I recommend that you install and is the recommended version for using with FutureMUD. But if you happen to be using a hosting provider that doesn't support MySQL 8 for whatever reason, FutureMUD will run with MySQL 5.7 without any problems. And it will actually also run with 5.6, but I have run into some problems in the past with that. Give me my download. There we go. I don't know why you end up having to do that twice. I've had to do that on both of the other times I was doing a practice run of this as well. Possibly something to do with the crappy lockdown version of Internet Explorer or Edge that ships with these things, but you know, if you were setting this up for real, your first action might have been to open this up and download Chrome or Firefox or something else, but that's an unnecessary step. So we're going to run that installer. And keeping in mind, I am running this on a free tier server, so this is quite possibly the slowest incarnation of Windows that you could possibly have. This will all go much quicker if you're on a better box or if you're on your personal computer. The MUD engine works just fine on the free tier level stuff if you're just developing and at the stage where you're building your MUD. So if you're just messing around or you're doing your initial build with just you and a couple of people, don't shell out for a big expensive machine, but you may need to boost it a little bit once you actually have players going. I recommend that we're going to go custom today. You could go developer default and just install some stuff that's unnecessary. What we're really interested in is the server and the workbench. So we're going to install everything. So the server is the main requirement. The workbench is really nice to have, but it is one of the nice things about working on a Windows box is having access to MySQL Workbench. If you are not using MySQL Workbench or you're in Linux, you may want to install something like phpMyAdmin so you can work with your database without having to do it on the command line. Doing command line MySQL stuff is not especially fun when you've got to do the odd bit of database editing, which you still need to do for a few things in FutureMUD. I'm working on closing the gaps. Alright, now we've got to configure the server. So you will most certainly, if you're doing this on your home PC, just choose development computer. But if you're doing this on your actual application server, choose server computer. All of the rest of these things are fine as a default. If you need to change them, you can, but note we're going to be referring to the port later. So if you change the port, you need to remember that. But 3306, the default, is fine. We're going to use the recommended setting. You'll set up a root password. I'm just going to use password because this is a demo server that's going to go down in a few minutes. We are going to add a user account later, but we're not going to do it through this installer, so just don't do anything there. But yeah, you probably want to put a stronger password on your root password. The rest of this stuff is fine to have as default. And then we execute that configuration. So that's basically just setting up a MySQL instance, starting it, and installing, the basic stuff it needs to manage itself, the performance schemas and automatic updates and all that kind of stuff. So it's all complete, and it's going to launch Workbench. So this is MySQL Workbench. We're going to go into the local instance, enter that root password from before. Right, so what you want to do is you want to go into server, user and privileges, and we're going to create a user. This is not strictly necessary. There's no reason you couldn't run your MUD using the root account, but it's just not very good practice. So we're going to add an account. We're going to call the user FutureMUD. I'm going to limit them to being on localhost, so that this means that they can't connect remotely. This is only recognized when they're doing it locally. Again, the password is going to be password. And we want schema privileges. We want an add an entry for all schemas. And we want to select all. It won't select grant, and we don't want to select grant, but we want all of the rest of those privileges. You definitely do need most of these because of the way that Entity Framework automatically manages database updates. It requires a reasonably extensive set of rights. I'm sure there's probably one or two things we could trim down, but let's just give it everything and apply. So make note of the user that you made, FutureMUD, and the password that you gave it, because you're going to need to refer back to that. The next thing we're actually going to do, though, is install the MUD. So if you go to labmud.com, you'll notice there is this FutureMUD public releases link up here. There's a bunch of different things you can install. Where we want the database seeder. Grab the one for Windows in this particular case. And extract the zip file. So here's the database seeder. So this is the step that trips some people up the connection string. The suggestion there is exactly what it is going to be right here. So we're basically just going to type it out. Server is localhost. The port is 3306 unless you changed it. The database, this is what you're going to call your database. So I'm going to call it demo DBO, but you can call it anything you want. The UID is FutureMUD because that's what we set up the user to be. The password is password. Obviously in your case it will be whatever password you gave it. Now the default command timeout is helpful on these slower boxes when it's doing big entity framework migration stuff, because the default timeout of 30 seconds does sometimes get exceeded. And now notice that it is actually applying the migrations, which means that it is connected successfully to the database and it has created the database. I'm going to pause the video and quickly run through the database seeder. If you want to see how to use the database seeder, go back to the Linux video because I go through option by option in that, but I'm not going to repeat myself in this video. So I'll pause it and come back when I'm going to quickly run through the database seeder, and I'll pause it when I have completed all of the options. Okay, so I've completely run through the seeder and selected all of the options. So now the database is set up, and we can see that if we go back into MySQL Workbench, select the Schemas tab and refresh it, we can see that there's that database created. And if we just wanted to, for example, grab a random table, ammunition types, show all of the values, there you can see that the database has been populated. So the seeder has done its job. So now we want to download the game engine. Alright, we'll take all of that, we'll make a folder on the C drive. We'll call it FutureMUD. We'll make a folder in here called binaries. We'll paste everything in there. If we go back to the seeder, it created a couple of files that we want. We want the start MUD script and we want the connection.config. So we're going to grab those. We're going to put them both in there. Now connection.config is how you control what port it's listening on. If we just open that with Notepad, you can see, don't change the top one, but if you wanted to run it on a port other than 4000, which is the default, you just edit that value there. And then the start MUD script, we should just be able to run that. Okay, there's obviously a problem. Ah yes, the MUD directory was not set properly. So the MUD directory is now it'll work. So what this script does is that every time the MUD crashes or is rebooted, it copies all the files out of the binaries folder into the main folder, and then it starts the MUD with the connection string that you'd previously set up in the seeder. So why that is important, it's what keeps your MUD rebooting when it crashes or when you reboot it. And it also allows you to do updates. So you just copy the if a new version comes out, you copy the updated files into binaries, and then when you reboot it, it'll copy them in. So that's actually ready to go. Now we shouldn't be able to connect to it remotely just yet because there's one more step we have to do. The final step, we need to go into Windows Firewall. So Windows Defender Firewall with Advanced Security. On the server by default, it's going to be quite locked down. Everything's going to be banned as an inbound traffic unless it's specifically allowed. So we're going to need to create a new rule. We're going to open up a port, TCP, and we want to open up port 4000. And if you change that, it'll be a different port. We want to allow the connection. We'll do it in all of those circumstances, and we'll call this MUD. There we go. So with all of that, if we just minimize everything, because I'm on Amazon, the public IP address is 204.236.164.113. So if I open up Mush Client, so that connection is 204.236.164.113. Actually, I forgot to do one step. Here I am rushing through it. I forgot to do the step on Amazon Web Services. This step may be different depending on how you're hosting it. So this is an Amazon specific. Yeah, this is Amazon specific. So in Amazon, I forgot that by default, the inbound rules that everything is disabled. So where do I go to edit these? Oh. Don't want to change it. Yes. Click on the security group. We want to edit the inbound rules. We want to add a rule, custom TCP for port 4000 anywhere, and save it. And there you have it. We have set up and connected to a FutureMUD. So to recap, install .NET 6, install MySQL Server and Workbench, create a user, run the seeder, set up Windows Firewall to allow inbound traffic, set up your hosting provider to allow inbound traffic, and you're done. Thank you very much.